Story 1. The Lock That Never Reset. I still think about that keypad more than I think about the cabin itself. Not the trees, not the cold, not the silence, just that little square of plastic by the door glowing green in the dark like it was happy about something I didn't understand yet. I booked that place because I wanted no interruptions. I got exactly the opposite. What stays with me isn't the idea that someone could have come in. It's that, by the end of the trip, I stopped feeling like I was ever alone in there to begin with. My name's Mara Ellison, and at the time this happened I was 31, doing freelance packaging design for outdoor brands. I took a week in early November and rented a small off-grid cabin outside Fort Nelson in northern British Columbia because I had a deadline stacked on top of another deadline, and I needed somewhere with bad enough cell service that nobody could call me and ask for one more revision. The host described it as quiet, private, and simple. He wasn't lying. It sat at the end of a logging road about half an hour from the nearest gas station, one room downstairs, a loft bed above, a propane stove, a rain barrel sink, and a backup generator in a small shed behind the cabin. The whole place smelled like damp wood, cold iron, and that dry propane tang that catches in the nose. I loved it immediately. I set up my laptop on the little pine table under the window, plugged in my drawing tablet, made coffee that tasted faintly metallic, and worked until late, listening to the low wind rub along the walls like a hand moving over corduroy. The keypad lock was part of the check-in instructions. The host had sent me a 6-digit code through the app and said the lock reset automatically at noon between bookings, so if I extended my stay he would send a new one. That seemed normal. The first day everything worked exactly the way it was supposed to. I unpacked, took a walk around the clearing before sunset, and even felt smug about how perfect the place was for getting work done. That night, sometime after 11, while I was exporting files at the table, I saw a green flash by the front door out of the corner of my eye. Just a quick blink from the keypad. Then nothing. I hadn't touched it. The room was so dark beyond my desk lamp that the little light felt weirdly bright. I stood up, checked the door, pressed one number, watched it wake up, then go still again. My first thought was battery glitch. That was it. Cold weather, cheap electronics, maybe some weird lag in the system. I even remember smiling to myself because it felt like the most boring explanation possible, which was reassuring. I opened the door, let in a stripe of black cold and the smell of wet pine, then shut it again and made sure the deadbolt caught. It did. I went back to the table. Still, for the next hour, every time the wind shifted and I heard the tiny rattle of the handle, I looked over. The next morning I woke up stiff from sleeping in the loft and climbed down to make coffee. My laptop charger, which I was sure I'd left coiled beside the table leg, was looped neatly on the windowsill. Not far away, just not where I'd left it. I stood there with the kettle in my hand and tried to remember if I'd moved it before bed because I didn't want to trip over it in the dark. That sounded like something I'd do. I told myself it was that. I told myself I was settling into a new place, and when you're alone somewhere unfamiliar, you notice your own habits in a strange way. You lose track of little things and then make them ominous because it's quiet enough to hear yourself think. That explanation held up well enough for most of the morning. I got dressed, pulled on my old gray thermal, opened the curtains, and sat down to work. Outside, the sky had that flat white northern look where you can't tell if it's about to snow or if it's already been snowing somewhere just beyond the trees. Around noon, I walked out to check the generator shed because the host had mentioned I should keep an eye on the fuel level if I used the space heater much. There was a laminated sheet clipped to the inside wall with times and notes in pen. Generator checks, oil changes, refills. I wasn't really reading it closely until I saw a line from the night before. written in different handwriting than the older entries. One line, just the time, around 3 in the morning, and the word run. I stared at it for a second, then laughed, actually laughed, because I assumed it was old and I just hadn't noticed the date format. The sheet was messy. Some entries were smudged. Some had no date at all. The host probably logged things whenever he happened to be out there. I bent down and checked the machine anyway. The metal housing was cold. I hadn't heard it in the night. If it had kicked on while I was asleep, I figured maybe it was automatic. A remote system. A timer. Something practical. The kind of thing cabin owners do because they can't drive 2 hours every time a battery drains. I went back inside feeling better. Not perfect, but better. The cabin still felt like a good choice. The chair by the stove was where it had been. My bag was under the bench. The coffee mug I'd rinsed out sat upside down on the dish towel. Normal, familiar. Mine. I worked the rest of the afternoon without thinking much about the generator log until dusk came early and turned the windows into black mirrors. That's when I noticed the bathroom door was almost closed. I never closed that door. I kept it open because the little room smelled faintly musty, like old towels that had dried too slowly. And I wanted the air moving through. I was sure of that. I crossed the room, pushed the door open with 2 fingers, and stood there looking in. Nothing wrong. Folded towels, plastic shower curtain, little frosted window over the sink. But the hand towel I'd used that morning was hanging straight and flat, centered on the bar like a hotel display. I always leave towels bunched. I don't know why that was the detail that bothered me, but it was. It felt polite in a way I hadn't been. I checked the whole cabin after that, telling myself I was being sensible. I looked under the loft stairs, opened the pantry, even pulled back the shower curtain with a stupid little laugh under my breath, because I knew there was nobody there and I wanted to prove it to myself. The only sound was the stove ticking softly as it heated. I found nothing. By the time I sat back down, the rational part of my brain had returned with a whole stack of friendly explanations. I was tired. I was deep in a deadline. I was in a place that wasn't mine, trying to force it into my routine. People misremember. People especially misremember when every day looks like work, coffee, files, darkness, sleep. So I stayed on that thought. I leaned into it. I even started talking out loud a little, just to make the room feel occupied in a harmless way. "You're fine, Mara," I said once, which felt embarrassing and helpful at the same time. I made pasta on the propane stove, ate it from the pot, and watched half an hour of a downloaded show in the loft before going back to work. For a while it worked. The cabin sounded ordinary again. Wind, stove, the little creak in the floorboards near the door when the wood settled, a place making place noises. Then, near midnight, I went to lock the door before climbing up to bed and saw the keypad glowing blue instead of dark. Not green this time. Blue, steady, like it was in setup mode. I crouched and looked closer. The numbers were cycling, not flashing randomly. Cycling one after another like the thing was thinking. Then it went blank. Then green, a soft electronic chirp. The kind you hear after a code is accepted. I stepped back so fast my heel hit the rug and slid. I grabbed the edge of the table and just listened. Nothing from outside. No footsteps on the porch. No knock. No voice. Just the wind moving through the spruce and the low hum of my laptop fan. I put my hand on the deadbolt. It was locked. I tried the handle. Still locked. I pressed the wake button on the keypad from inside and entered the code I'd been given. Red light. Invalid. That was the first moment I couldn't make it fit into a kind explanation. I went cold in a very practical way. Not dramatic. My hands stopped feeling connected to me properly. I pulled up the booking app and messaged the host, trying to sound calm because I still wanted this to be some dumb technical issue. I wrote that the lock seemed to have reset and asked if there was a backup code. No answer. I called through the app. It rang once and went to a generic voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. The cell signal in the cabin was weak enough that the message spun for a while before showing delivered. I spent the next half hour checking windows, which is when I found the one over the sink wasn't actually latched. It wasn't open, just not caught. I had never opened it. The metal latch was stiff and left a gray smell on my fingers when I forced it down. I checked the loft window too. Locked. Front door still deadbolted. Then I went back outside with a flashlight because I wanted to look at the keypad from the porch. Wanted to see if maybe there was some manufacturer label or reset pin I could use. The beam shook in my hand enough that the trees seemed to lean. The porch boards were damp and gave off that dark, wet wood smell. The keypad housing felt slightly warm under my fingers. On the side of it, nearly rubbed off, was a sticker with a model number and a tiny brand name. I searched it on my phone with 1 bar of service, standing in the cold until my ears hurt. Remote managed smart lock. Supports instant code changes. Access logs. Temporary guest credentials. My stomach dropped in this quiet, sinking way. Not because remote access itself was unusual. I knew hosts used that kind of thing all the time. It was what the feature implied. Someone somewhere had changed my code while I was asleep. Maybe the host, maybe a property manager, maybe some automated mistake tied to another booking. There were still explanations. I clung to them because I needed them. But now the cabin felt different under my feet. The table wasn't just a table. It was where I'd left my laptop open. The bathroom wasn't just the bathroom. It was where my toothbrush had been sitting, where my shampoo bottle cap had been turned the other direction that afternoon, and I had decided I was imagining. I went to the generator shed again with the flashlight and read the log properly. There were 2 recent entries I hadn't seen in the bad light before. One around 3 in the morning, one just after 5. Both in the same unfamiliar handwriting. Both just said run. I messaged the host again, more directly this time. I asked if anyone else had access to the property. I asked whether maintenance had been by. I asked whether the lock code had been changed remotely and why. No answer. Back inside, the air felt close even though the cabin wasn't warm. The smell of propane seemed stronger. I locked the bathroom window latch a second time, then pulled a chair under the front doorknob even though I knew that wouldn't really matter if someone had another code and I didn't. I put my phone on low power mode. I found the emergency flashlight in the kitchen drawer and set it on the table. Then I noticed the notebook. I had brought a yellow legal pad to sketch layout options for the project. I left it open beside my laptop. When I picked it up, there was an indentation on the top page. Not ink, just pressure marks, like someone had written on a page above it and torn that page off. I turned it sideways under the desk lamp until the grooves caught the light. It looked like numbers, 6 of them. Not mine, not the code I'd been sent. Another code. I don't know why that hit harder than the keypad changing. Maybe because it meant hands, not software, not a glitch. Someone had stood where I worked and used my paper. I tried the host again, nothing. I called the platform support line and got an automated queue estimate that made me want to throw the phone across the room. I let it sit on speaker while I kept checking the windows like that could solve anything. Eventually the call dropped. Around 1 in the morning I turned off every light except the lamp by the table and sat in the dark part of the cabin so I could see the front door clearly. The wind kept pressing at the walls in slow waves. Sometimes a branch scraped across the roof with a dry, dragging sound that made my throat tighten every time. I kept watching the keypad through the small glass pane in the upper half of the door. Nothing for a long time. just my own reflection, pale and tense and smaller than the room. Then, sometime after 2, it beeped. One soft tone. I was already standing before I realized I'd moved. The keypad lit up green. Then the numbers started scrolling again. Not random. Deliberate. 1 pause, 2 pause, 3. It was changing the code while I was inside, and I was close enough to see it happen through the glass. I could hear the tiny clicks from the lock mechanism, little internal sounds like teeth setting into a new shape. I was looking right at it when the deadbolt twitched. I don't remember deciding to back away. My body just did it. My mouth had gone so dry I couldn't swallow properly. I grabbed my phone, my flashlight, and the legal pad for no reason I can explain, then ran to the bathroom because it was the only room downstairs with a door that locked from the inside. I shoved the little trash can against it, then the laundry basket, then sat on the closed toilet lid with my hand over my mouth, trying not to breathe loudly. The room smelled like cold porcelain and mildew and my own sweat. I could hear nothing for the first few seconds except the rush in my ears. Then came the second beep, then the sound of the front door opening, not wide. Just enough that I heard the seal pull free from the frame, that sticky rubber peel, and then a very slight thump against the chair I'd wedged under the knob. Whoever it was didn't force it after that. That was almost worse. They just stood there. I know how that sounds. I know I couldn't see them. But when someone is in a small wooden place with you, you feel it. The air changes. The silence changes shape. I stared at the strip of darkness under the bathroom door until my eyes watered. After maybe a minute, I saw movement there. Not feet. Light. My lamp in the main room being blocked and unblocked as something moved between it and the hallway. Slow. Unhurried. Drawers opening in the kitchen. One at a time. The scrape of wood on wood. The clink of cutlery. Then the loft ladder creaked. Then silent. Then the keypad beeped again from the front door like someone was testing it from the inside now. My legs were cramping. I couldn't get a signal strong enough to place a reliable call, but I kept trying anyway, crouched on the floor with my phone held up toward the little bathroom window. I typed a message to my sister with the cabin address and hit send over and over until one bar appeared and the thing finally left my screen. I don't know if it went through then or later. At some point I realized I'd been pressing my fingernails so hard into the legal pad that I tore the paper. The hours after that didn't feel like hours. They felt like waiting inside one long-held breath. Once, maybe around 4, I heard the generator start outside. I heard it catch, settle into a heavy mechanical hum, then stop after less than a minute. Someone had gone out there, or someone had switched it on remotely too. I still don't know which is worse. Once I heard water run in the sink for a few seconds. Once I heard the loft bed frame complain under weight. Through all of it, nobody spoke. Nobody knocked on the bathroom door. Nobody tried the handle. That restraint felt intimate in a way violence almost wouldn't have. Like whoever was out there knew exactly how little they needed to do. A gray line finally showed at the bathroom window just before 7. I waited longer than I needed to because I was terrified of getting tricked by morning, as if daylight could lie. When I opened the bathroom door, the cabin looked almost normal. Chair still under the front knob, lamp still on. My laptop closed, not asleep, closed. The legal pad page was gone. The bathroom hand towel had been folded into thirds on the sink, and the front door was locked again. I didn't try to understand any of it. I shoved my things into my bag without folding anything, left the coffee tin open on the counter, and drove out with the tires spitting mud from the road. My hands shook so badly on the steering wheel that the truck drifted twice before I got back to the highway. Once I had signal, I reported everything to the platform, then to the local detachment, then to the platform again because the first response I got sounded like it had been pasted from a template about host communication issues. The host never replied to me directly. The listing disappeared for a few days, then came back with new photos and a slightly different title. I made the deadline, if that matters. I finished the project at my sister's kitchen table 2 days later with 3 cups of bad diner coffee and me, and every light in her house on. But I don't work in remote rentals anymore. I don't stay anywhere with a smart lock unless I can see a mechanical deadbolt on the inside. Even then, I still check the hinges, the windows, the little places where somebody else's idea of access hides inside a convenience feature. What I can't get out of my head is the order of it. The code changed before I knew it had changed. My things moved before I admitted they had moved. The generator log showed activity during hours when I was asleep and supposed to be alone. All of that means the story didn't start when I noticed it. It started earlier, in ways I wasn't present for. That's the part that still feels like a hand on the back of my neck. Not that someone entered, that someone may have already known how long I slept, where I kept my notebook, which room I thought I could make safe, and if the lock could still be accessed remotely after I left. I still don't know whether the next guest walked into that cabin alone. I told myself for months that it had to be the host, because at least a host is a person with a motive you can name. Maintenance, negligent, some illegal side arrangement, some disgusting misuse of access. But every time I settle on one explanation, another detail pulls it apart. If it was the host, why not answer once I started messaging? If it was a glitch, why was my legal pad page missing? If it was somebody local with unauthorized access, how did they know when to come and when to stop? I don't need a dramatic answer anymore. I just need one ordinary answer that doesn't make the cabin feel larger in my mind than it was in real life. I haven't found it. I still have that model number saved in a notes app on my phone. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I look it up again like the manual might have changed in the night, and finally explain the sound of a front door unlocking while I was already inside. Story 2. The name he used. The first note should have sent me straight back downstairs. That's the clean version of the story. The version where I see my own name written on a page inside a place I'd just checked into alone. And I leave. But that's not what I did. I stood there in a little apartment in Prague with my overnight bag still hanging off one shoulder, reading neat black letters on cheap white paper. And I spent the next 10 minutes trying to turn it into something harmless. That's what I remember most now, how hard I worked to make it normal. My name's Alina Voss. I was 23 when this happened, finishing my last year of university and doing what I called a brave solo weekend. Even though I hated being alone in unfamiliar places, I booked a cheap apartment in downtown Prague in late October because flights were affordable, hotels were not, and the listing photos made the place look bright and simple. It was on a narrow side street off a busier road near Novo Mesto, above a convenience store with a flickering beer sign in the window. The building hallway smelled like old cooking oil and floor cleaner. Inside the apartment, the air had that sharp cleaning chemical smell people use when they want a place to seem fresher than it really is. It was smaller than the photos, of course. One main room with a fold-out bed, a kitchenette along one wall, and a bathroom with loose tile near the sink. The windows were thin enough that I could hear streetcars whining on the turns and people laughing outside in bursts. I told myself that was good. City noise meant people nearby. People nearby meant safe. The host never met me. Everything had been through the app. Code for the lockbox, key instructions, Wi-Fi password, all normal. I put my bag on the bed, walked the perimeter of the apartment the way my mother always does in hotels, checked the bathroom, looked behind the shower curtain even though I felt stupid doing it, then opened the little fridge and laughed because someone had left exactly one lemon inside. I was making a plan in my head for the weekend. Museum tomorrow, Old Town the day after, maybe a river walk if the weather held when I turned back toward the kitchenette and saw the note. It was on the counter where I would have sworn there had been nothing 30 seconds earlier. One sheet folded once. My name on the front, Alina. Not Miss Voss, not welcome. Just my first name in clean, careful handwriting. I stared at it, then immediately started doing the work of explaining it away. Maybe it had been tucked under the fruit bowl and slipped out when I moved my bag. Maybe the host had left it there before I arrived and I just missed it because I was keyed up from travel. Maybe some hosts did this. Personal touches, handwritten greetings, trying to seem warm instead of automated. I could feel my pulse climbing anyway, that weird hollow beat you get under the ribs when something lands wrong before your brain catches up. Inside, it said, "Hope the stairs weren't too much. You made it in fine. Enjoy the weekend." There was no signature. I read it 4 times. My brain kept snagging on "made it in fine," because yes, I had made it in fine, but who talks like that in a welcome note? It sounded observed. Then I told myself that was ridiculous because of course the host knew I'd made it in fine. The key had been returned to the lockbox. The app showed check-in complete. It could have been written hours earlier. It probably was. I set it beside the kettle and started unpacking, deliberately slow, narrating little pieces of logic in my head like I was trying to calm a skittish animal. People leave notes. Hosts use first names. Maybe the host saw me on the entry camera and wanted to seem attentive. Maybe they wrote it for whoever checked in and reused paper. Maybe I was tired and being dramatic because I didn't like solo travel as much as I pretended to. That last one worked well enough for a bit. I hung my coat, plugged in my phone, washed my hands, then spent half an hour looking up places for dinner. The apartment stayed ordinary. Street noise through the glass, heating pipes ticking. Somebody above me walking heavily enough to make the ceiling give a faint, powdery crackle. I remember feeling embarrassed that the note had gotten to me. I almost took a picture of it to send to my friend Teresa with some joke about boutique hospitality. Then I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, there was a second note on the small round table by the window. "You don't need the umbrella, it won't rain until later." Same handwriting. I just stood there. The umbrella part got me because I had in fact picked up the apartment umbrella from the stand by the door and considered taking it. I hadn't texted anyone that. I hadn't said it out loud. It had been one of those quick internal decisions people barely register. Umbrella, no umbrella. That kind of nothing choice. I walked the apartment again, faster this time. Bathroom under the bed frame, behind the curtain, the little cleaning closet by the fridge. Nothing. I checked the lock on the main door. Locked. I checked the window latches. Closed. I looked up toward the smoke detector because I'd suddenly convinced myself there had to be some camera I hadn't noticed. I found nothing, which didn't calm me down. It just made the whole thing slipperier. I messaged the host through the app with a photo of the note and asked if they'd left several notes in the apartment. No reply. The typing bubble never appeared. I should say something about the kind of person I was then. I noticed things immediately. I always have. But noticing something wrong isn't the same as trusting yourself about it. My brain doesn't go straight to danger. It goes to justification, then correction, then shame for overreacting. I start building explanations almost before I'm done being startled. That is exactly what I did. I told myself the host had maybe entered while I was in the bathroom to leave recommendations and had been awkward about it. I told myself maybe the apartment had some second entrance for cleaning staff and I was making it sinister because I was alone. I told myself I should go out, get dinner, be around other people, and this would all shrink back to ordinary scale. So I did. I left. The hallway light buzzed overhead. The stair rail was sticky under my palm. Outside, the evening was cold and damp and full of traffic and voices, and I felt better almost instantly because reality in groups is easier to borrow. I ate dumplings in a crowded place where the windows steamed up from the kitchen. I texted Teresa. I didn't mention the notes at first. I only sent pictures of the square and the dessert I bought from a kiosk. By the time I walked back to the apartment, I had almost convinced myself the whole thing would look different under brighter lights and with food in my stomach. There was a note taped to the inside of the door. Good choice with dinner. You looked less tense when you came back. My skin went prickly all along my arms. I pulled the note down so fast it tore at the corner. I went straight to the window, yanked the curtain aside, and looked down at the street. A line of parked cars, yellow spill from the shop sign, 2 people smoking under the awning across the road, a man in a knit cap walking a dog that kept stopping to sniff the drain. Nothing I could point to and say there. That's him. My own reflection floated in the glass over all of it, pale and uncertain. That note changed the feeling of the room completely. Every surface started looking staged, the fruit bowl with nothing in it, the folded extra blanket, the single lemon in the fridge. The place wasn't just small anymore. It was penetrable. I kept thinking there must be an explanation I hadn't found yet, and each explanation made me feel worse than the last. If the host was entering, that was bad. If someone else had keys, that was worse. If I was missing some obvious hidden camera, that meant somebody had been watching me search for the thing watching me. I called Teresa then, really called, voice shaking enough that she noticed immediately. I read the notes to her, all 3 of them. And she reacted exactly how I needed somebody to react. Not with mockery, not with "it's probably nothing." She said, "I'm coming over." She was staying with cousins across the river and said she'd be there in 20 minutes. I spent those 20 minutes standing with my back against the apartment door. Coat on, shoes on, phone in hand, listening to every sound in the hallway. Someone went up the stairs and passed my floor without stopping. A door slammed somewhere below. Water rattled through pipes. When Teresa knocked, I nearly cried from relief. She came in carrying a grocery bag and instantly changed the atmosphere just by being another body in the room. She examined the notes like evidence. She checked under the bed, the closet, behind the little freestanding wardrobe. She found nothing. She also did what good friends do when you're close to spiraling. She brought the scale of things down. She said maybe the host was creepy, but not necessarily dangerous. She said some owners kept duplicate keys and popped in more than they admitted. She said we should contact the platform together in the morning if it continued. Then she said she'd stay the night. Nothing happened while she was there. That matters because it gave me exactly what the outline of this story promised me. A false resolution convincing enough to lower my guard. We ordered takeaway, watched some terrible dating show with Czech subtitles, and stayed up too late laughing at it. Every hour that passed without a new note made the whole thing seem more manageable. By midnight, I had moved from fear to anger. I started thinking this was maybe a host trying to seem intimate and attentive and failing in a gross, boundary-crossing way. Bad, yes. Predatory, maybe, but containable. We even slept. Teresa took the bed and I took the fold-out chair because she was doing me a favor. And because I didn't want to admit I didn't want to be the one closest to the door. In the morning, everything still looked normal. No fresh paper on the counter, no note by the kettle, sunlight through thin curtains, gray and weak. The apartment felt cramped and slightly silly again, as if the presence of another person had broken some trick the room was trying to play. Teresa had to leave around 10 to meet her cousins for brunch. She helped me message the platform from the app. attaching photos of everything. We got one of those polite automated replies saying they'd review the concern and contact the host. Then she hugged me in the hall and said to come stay with her cousins if anything else even slightly weird happened. I watched her go down the stairs. I actually counted after that. 1 minute, 2, 3. I locked the apartment door, leaned against it, and felt ridiculous for being so wound up. I was telling myself I would shower, then maybe move my things to a hostel if it would help me relax. When I saw the 4th note, it was on the pillow. Same paper, same handwriting. 10:18. You waited until she reached the street before you locked the door. I didn't scream. I made this tiny sound like all the air in me left through a straw. My hands were so slick I nearly dropped the page. It wasn't just that it referenced Teresa leaving, it was the exact time. And it used she, not your friend, as if whoever wrote it had been watching the departure rather than being told about it. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 10:19. The note was dry, crisp, already there. That meant it had been placed either seconds before I noticed it or while I was in the apartment with Teresa and neither of us saw. That's when the paranoia really set in. Not fear in one direction, fear in every direction at once. I tore through the place like I was trying to break the illusion by force. I unscrewed the smoke detector. I checked the vents. I opened the cabinet under the sink and found only spare paper towels and a leaking bottle of cleaner. I pressed on sections of wall, stupidly, as if there might be a hidden panel like in a movie. I even went into the hallway barefoot and looked at the opposite apartment door, convinced for a second that someone over there had some angle into my window. A woman from downstairs came up carrying groceries and gave me the kind of polite, wary glance people give when they think you might be trouble. I asked, too fast, if she knew the owner of my apartment. She said, "Which owner?" then kept climbing. That answer didn't help. I called the host directly from the number listed in the booking details because the app messages were still unanswered. It rang long enough that I thought maybe it would go to voicemail. Then a man answered in English with a flat, almost sleepy voice. I said my name and the apartment address and asked if anyone had entered the unit. He didn't pause. He just said no one should be bothering, not addressing the question. Not surprised, just that. I asked about the notes. He said, "Stay calm," and then the line went dead. I called back and got nothing. At that point I called Teresa, and while I was talking to her, someone knocked on the apartment door. 3 soft knocks, not pounding, not urgent. I froze so hard my jaw hurt. Teresa kept saying my name in my ear. I couldn't answer for a second because I was staring at the gap under the door waiting for paper to slide through. Instead, a woman's voice from the hall said, in accented English, "Neighbor, I come from downstairs. You called?" Apparently Teresa, who is a much more competent person than I was in that moment, had contacted the platform support number herself and also sent a message to the emergency contact listed for the building, who must have notified somebody nearby. I kept the chain on when I opened the door. The neighbor was maybe in her 50s, wearing a brown cardigan and holding a ring of keys. She looked annoyed, which weirdly comforted me. Annoyed people feel real. She stepped inside, listened while I showed her the notes, and then said there was no second entrance she knew about. No caretaker access except the main door. She checked the bathroom window and frowned because the latch looked recently tampered with, not broken, just rubbed bright around the screws like it had been removed and reattached before. We didn't stay long after that. She told me to pack, and I packed. Fast. Toothbrush, clothes, charger, passport. I left shampoo and snacks and one sock behind because my hands would not stop shaking. Teresa met me downstairs with a taxi already waiting. I never spent the second night. The platform refunded part of the stay after a week of messages and screenshots and delays. The listing stayed up for at least another month under the same host name. I know because I checked. I also know this sounds smaller than some stories. No chase, no broken door, no body in the closet, but that apartment changed the way I understand being observed. There is a special kind of panic that comes from not knowing where the line of sight is. You keep imagining every ordinary object as a possible opening, a screwhead, a vent, a peephole reversed the wrong way. What I still think about is the note that didn't arrive, the next one, because the pattern was moving somewhere. The messages started helpful, then familiar, then instructive. You don't need the umbrella. Good choice with dinner. You looked less tense. By the morning after Teresa left, whoever was writing them had switched from noticing to timing. I don't know what the next note would have said if I had stayed alone that second night. I just know I believe there would have been one, and I don't think it would have been on paper. For months after, every hotel room and rental felt over-described to me, like someone had already decided what I would do in it before I arrived. I still keep the fourth note in a book I never open, and sometimes I catch myself wondering whether the handwriting looked familiar because I'd seen it somewhere before, or because it was meant to feel that way. The strangest part is that I can still argue against my own fear if I let myself. Maybe the host was entering with a duplicate key. Maybe the building neighbor knew more than she said. Maybe the removed window latch meant somebody had been there before me, not during my stay. But none of those explanations helps because they all keep the same thing intact. Somebody had access. Somebody was comfortable enough in that access to address me by name from inside a room I was supposed to be alone in. I don't need the final answer to know how close that came to becoming something worse. Sometimes what unsettles you isn't what happened. It's the point where the pattern was clearly moving and you left before it finished spelling itself out. The next story is from someone who didn't have that option. Not really. He had a deadline, a strange house, and far too much time left before morning. Story 3. The guest who was early. I knew the night had gone wrong before I actually saw anyone. That's important. I didn't get spooked by a face at the window or some obvious break-in. I got undone by timing, by the way the house seemed to know what room I was in before any person should have known it, by the ticking clock in the hallway that somehow made every decision feel measured. If you've ever spent a night somewhere because you had no better option, you know how hard you worked to stay agreeable to the situation. I did that for hours. Long past the point when I should have left. My name's Julian Mercer. I was 42 then. Between stable jobs in a way that sounds more graceful than it felt, and I had driven to Phoenix in late May for a last-minute second interview with a logistics company that could have changed my life. The interview was set for 8 in the morning in an office park in Tempe. Every hotel within a reasonable distance was booked because of some convention and a playoff game happening the same weekend. So I took the only listing left that wasn't wildly expensive, a shared Airbnb house on the west side in a dry stucco neighborhood where every yard looked bleached by the sun. The host messaged that another guest might arrive late, maybe after midnight, and asked me not to be alarmed if I heard someone settling in. I wasn't thrilled about sharing, but I wasn't in a position to be picky. I needed sleep. I needed a shower. I needed to be presentable by morning. That was the clock in my head from the start. Get through the night. Be functional by 8. The house itself was single-story. Tan walls outside. Gravel landscaping. A little metal sun ornament by the garage. Inside it smelled like dust warmed all day and then released by air conditioning. The air was cool, but not fresh. Every room had that sealed-up rental feeling, like furniture chosen for durability instead of comfort. There was a wall clock in the hallway that ticked loudly enough to hear from almost anywhere in the house. I noticed that right away. Also the doors. None of them latched cleanly unless you gave them a firm push at the end. The host had messaged my room assignment and left a key on the kitchen counter with a sticky note that said Julian, which I didn't love, but again I was in practical mode. I took the back bedroom, hung my interview shirt in the bathroom to unwrinkle with shower steam, set my shoes by the bed, laid out my folder with resumes and told myself not to create problems where there weren't any. The first small thing was the suitcase in the hallway. Dark blue roller bag, medium-sized, sitting against the wall near the other bedroom. No person attached to it, no jacket thrown over it, just there. The host had said another guest might arrive late. It was only a little after 7. I assumed they came early. That was the reasonable interpretation, and because I didn't want to be the guy who complains about shared spaces after choosing a shared space, I went with it immediately. Maybe they were out getting food. Maybe they'd checked in before me and were resting. I kept my eyes off the other bedroom door and took my things to my room like nothing about it was odd. That should have stayed ordinary. It almost did. I showered, changed into a clean t-shirt and heated a microwave meal I'd bought at a gas station because I didn't want to lose time going back out. The kitchen fluorescent light had this faint buzz to it that made the whole room feel more tired than it was. While I ate at the counter, I heard movement from somewhere down the hall. Not footsteps exactly, more like a shift, a thud, then the soft drag of something against carpet. I looked up automatically. Then I looked back down at my food because I didn't want to seem nosy in an empty house, which in retrospect was a ridiculous performance. There was no one there to think well of me, but that was how my brain worked. I didn't want to overstep. I didn't want to be rude to a stranger I might have to pass in the hall later in my socks. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from the host. Just a quick update. Other guest delayed. Should arrive after midnight. Sorry for any inconvenience. I looked at the hallway, looked at the suitcase, looked back at the message. There were still easy explanations. The bag might belong to the host. The host might have forgotten it was already there. Another guest might have dropped belongings off earlier and left again. If I'd been anywhere but that house on that night, I might have dug into it right then. But I had an interview in the morning. I had one suit jacket hanging in the closet and not much money left after gas. I was trying with all my strength to protect the possibility of a normal night. So I messaged back politely. I said I thought I saw luggage already there, just checking whether someone was present. He replied almost immediately. Old storage. Ignore it. I did not believe that, but I let the lie sit because calling it out would have forced a level of confrontation I didn't want with a stranger who controlled the house I was sleeping in. That's the stupid part of being socially avoidant in the wrong setting. You keep choosing temporary peace over useful clarity. I carried my plate to the sink and noticed with this weird little drop in my stomach that there was already a glass in the drying rack with water spots on it. One glass, fresh enough that the ring under it on the steel drain board hadn't dried completely. I checked the time then, a little after 8. 12 hours until the interview if you counted the drive, the coffee stop, the need to be awake enough to speak clearly. I started measuring everything against that. Could I still leave and find somewhere else? Maybe, but maybe not without losing sleep I badly needed. Could I call the host and complain? Yes, but then what? Sit in my car in Phoenix heat waiting for a refund that might not come. I told myself if I heard anything more definite, I'd go. That was the bargain I made. One more data point. Back in my room, I reviewed answers to common interview questions and tried to settle my breathing. The mattress had a plastic cover under the sheets that made a faint crackle every time I shifted. The vent blew cool air that smelled faintly of lint. Through the wall I could hear the hallway clock. Tick, tick, tick. Around 9 I heard a door close somewhere outside my room. Not slammed, just firmly enough that the latch clicked. I sat up, waited, then heard water run in the bathroom sink, stop and run again. I texted the host another careful message. Thought you said no one was there yet. This time the reply took longer. Sorry, cleaning person may have stopped by to check supplies. At 9 at night, in a shared house with a guest checked in. It was such a bad explanation that it almost offended me. I stared at my phone with my jaw tight, then typed and erased 3 different responses because every version sounded either too accusing or too passive. In the end, I sent nothing. That's what I mean about the way I was at the time. I kept acting as if tone management would save me. The next thing that really got under my skin was how the movement in the house seemed to fall in with mine. When I left my room to use the bathroom, I heard motion from the front of the house. When I went back and shut my door, the other movement stopped. When I opened my door 10 minutes later just to test it, something in the living room creaked once, like a recliner shifting under weight. I stood there barefoot on the carpet with my hand on the knob, listening so hard my teeth felt sore. Nothing. Then, as I was closing the door again, 2 soft taps sounded from the wall beside me. Not the door, the wall. I said hello before I could stop myself. No answer. A minute later, my phone buzzed again. Host this time. Please respect quiet hours for other guests. That message made my stomach turn over. I hadn't messaged him, I hadn't made noise except for that single word, which meant either he was inside the house in earshot or someone else was updating him in real time. Neither option sat right. I checked the time. Almost 10. 10 hours until the interview. The arithmetic started getting cruel. If I left now and found another place by midnight, I could maybe sleep 4 hours. If I stayed and nothing happened, I'd get 6. My whole future felt stupidly tied to the difference between those numbers. I called my sister in Tucson, partly because she was awake, partly because saying the situation out loud might make it sound normal or clearly dangerous, and either would help. I told her there might be another guest earlier than expected. The host was being weird, I didn't love the vibes. She said, then leave. Simple. Clean. Exactly the right advice. I nearly took it. I even started putting my things back into my duffel. Then the host sent another message. False alarm. House is empty except you. Old noise from plumbing. Rest up for tomorrow. And because I wanted that to be true so badly, I let it take the weight for me. That's the false part. The false resolution in this story wasn't a dramatic fix. It was a plausible lie arriving exactly when I needed permission to stop escalating. I unpacked the shirt again. I texted my sister that I might be overreacting. I locked my room door, pushed it until the latch really caught, and set an alarm for 6. For about an hour it actually quieted down. No footsteps, no doors, no texts. Just the clock and the air vent and the occasional car passing outside. I lay there in the dark trying to slow my thoughts. The digital alarm clock by the bed glowed blue. 11. 11:30. At some point I must have drifted because the next thing I remember is waking with my mouth dry and the room colder than before. The hallway clock was still ticking. There was a line of light under my door. I checked my phone. Just after 1 in the morning. 7 hours until the interview. I got up and opened the door 2 inches. The hallway light was on, the blue suitcase was gone, my chest tightened so quickly it hurt. I stepped into the hall and saw that the other bedroom door was open now. Not wide, just enough to show darkness inside. I remember the feeling in my knees more than anything, how uncertain they suddenly seemed. I wanted to go back into my room and lock the door. I wanted to leave, I wanted, absurdly, not to offend whoever might be in that bedroom by seeming suspicious. That's still hard for me to admit. Fear and social conditioning are a stupid combination. I went to the bathroom instead because it was halfway between doing nothing and doing something. The sink was wet, fresh wet, beads still clinging along the basin edge. On the mirror, written through the steam residue with a finger, was one word: early. I backed out so fast I hit the doorframe with my shoulder. The hallway light buzzed overhead. Somewhere toward the kitchen something clicked. Then a voice, calm and low, said, "You can use the other bathroom," male voice. Close enough to be in the house, not close enough to place. I grabbed my phone and bag and went for my room. Another voice, farther back, almost the same tone but not the same person, said, "No rush, Julian." I stopped dead. There are a lot of ways someone can use your name in a frightening way. Loud, threatening, angry. This wasn't that. It sounded expected, like they were reminding me of an appointment. I got inside my room and pushed the door shut. My fingers slipped twice on the lock. I called the host, straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. I called emergency support through the booking platform and got a live person after what felt like hours but was probably less than a minute. I was whispering and talking too fast. Shared house, unauthorized people. They know my name. I need to leave, but I don't know if I'm safe to cross the hall. The support person kept asking whether there had been a break-in or immediate physical harm. I could hear how bad my answers sounded. No visible break-in. No direct threat. No, I don't know how many people. Yes, I can call local police if I feel unsafe. That phrasing made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. If I feel unsafe. A soft knock came on my door while I was on the phone. 3 taps. Then the first voice said, "You overslept." The support person was still asking for the reservation number. My mouth tasted metallic. I whispered that there were people at the door. She told me to remain where I was and contact emergency services. Then the line crackled and dropped. Of course it did. I stayed absolutely still for a few seconds, not breathing right, waiting for the knob to turn. It didn't. Instead, I heard movement down the hall, one set of steps, then another. Separate, distinct. Doors in that house didn't latch unless you forced them. I listened as something or someone closed one gently, then another somewhere farther away. The clock kept ticking between every sound. 1:15, 1:16, 1:17. Time wasn't helping me anymore. It was just proving how long this could continue before dawn. I shoved everything into my bag without folding. Resume folder bent in half. Phone charger half yanked from the wall. I put on my shoes with my hands shaking so badly I couldn't double knot them. My car keys were on the nightstand. I held them between my fingers like that would make them useful as a weapon, which it wouldn't. Then I opened the window to see if I could get out that way. It was painted partially shut and had a security screen on the outside fixed with screws. I pushed until my forearms burned. It moved maybe 3 inches. That was attempt 1. Attempt 2 was the door. I cracked it and looked. Empty hallway. Lights still on. Other bedroom still open. My duffel strap bit into my shoulder as I stepped out and moved toward the front of the house. The air in the hall felt colder than the bedroom. Dry, dusty. At the kitchen entrance, I heard the scrape of a chair leg from the living room. I turned and saw no one. But there was a mug on the coffee table now, half full of something dark. Beside it, my interview folder, the one I'd bent and packed a minute earlier. I know what I said. I know how impossible that sounds, but it was there. Same folder. Crease across the center. My name on the tab in black marker. My hands went numb. I lunged for it, grabbed it, and that's when both voices spoke at once. One from the kitchen behind me, one from the hall to my left. "You're early." "No, sorry, that's not right." That wasn't the line. The line was worse because it made me part of a pattern I didn't understand. Both voices said at the exact same time, "You can go in now, Julian," the same calm tone. Two different directions. No hurry in either voice. I didn't wait to identify them. I ran for the front door. The knob slipped once because my palm was wet. I yanked hard, remembered the latch issue, and shouldered it. The door opened just enough for cold pre-dawn air to hit my face before something moved in the reflection of the hall mirror behind me. Not a full body. Not enough for me to count. Just shapes where there shouldn't have been shapes. One at the kitchen edge, another farther down the hall. Still. Watching. I got out. That part is blessedly simple. I got out, slammed the door, and ran to my car with my bag hitting against my side and my breath tearing in my throat. The gravel in the driveway shifted under my shoes. I dropped my keys once trying to unlock the car. When I finally got inside, I locked the doors before starting the engine and looked back at the house. Hall light on, front curtain still. No one came out, no one banged on the door, no one waved from the window. The clock ticked inside that house whether I could hear it or not. I knew that with weird certainty. I drove until the sky started turning from black to dusty purple at the edges. I parked at a 24-hour diner off the interstate and sat there shaking over coffee I couldn't taste. My interview was in a few hours. My suit shirt was wrinkled. My resume folder smelled faintly like the house, dust and that stale, cooled air smell. I called the company and lied about a car problem. They offered to reschedule, then didn't. Maybe I sounded unreliable. Maybe I was. Either way, I missed it. The platform refunded me later after several calls and an incident report. The host claimed there had been a misunderstanding about shared occupancy and that no unauthorized guests were present. That wording still bothers me. Shared occupancy. As if the problem was scheduling. As if the real issue wasn't that somebody in that house had coordinated themselves around me so precisely that by the end, my own name sounded like an instruction. I keep coming back to the number of people because that's the question the rest of the story hangs from. If there was only one person, then the timing of those voices means something almost harder for me to sit with. If there were two, then the host knew more than he admitted or didn't care enough to know who was in his house with paying guests. I never saw faces clearly enough to attach them to bodies, which means the story stays trapped in sound and movement in that ticking clock. How many people were actually inside that house that night? One host and one guest. Two guests and a host somewhere else. Two strangers who had done this before. I don't know. I only know that by 1 in the morning the house had stopped feeling like a place I was staying in and started feeling like a place I had arrived at according to someone else's plan. I still cannot hear a loud wall clock in an unfamiliar room without checking every door twice, pushing until each latch catches, and listening for whether the silence adjusts itself after I move. Missing the interview bothered me for a long time because it made the night feel expensive in a way that was easy to measure. Lost chance, lost money, lost sleep. But the worst loss was subtler. It was the sense that politeness is neutral. It isn't. Sometimes it keeps you safe, and sometimes it keeps you in a hallway longer than you should be there because you don't want to appear rude to the person quietly arranging. If I'd left at 8 or 10, or when my sister first said get out, this story would be shorter. That's what makes it feel inevitable to me now. The house didn't trap me with locks, it counted on smaller things. Courtesy, embarrassment, the desire to make it to morning without causing a scene. The next story isn't about a night like that. It's about a place that looked wrong in ways you could document, which should have made it easier. It didn't. Story 4. The listing photos didn't match. The photograph is the reason I stopped telling myself I was only documenting decor changes. Up until then I had a system, and systems make strange things feel manageable. Compare the room to the listing. Mark differences. Date them. keep notes. I'm a writer, or was trying to be then, and that kind of quiet observation is usually a comfort to me. It wasn't enough there. The more carefully I recorded the house, the less it resembled anything simple, and the less simple it became, the more personal the changes felt. My name is Lucien Hart. I was 58 when I rented that house in southern France for a month to work on a manuscript that wasn't going well in my apartment in Lyon. The listing promised silence, vineyards, long afternoons, a discounted rate for extended stays. It was outside a village near Uzes, down a narrow road lined with scrub and stone walls, the kind of place where evenings carry insect noise so steadily it becomes a surface rather than a sound. The house itself was old stone with pale shutters and uneven tile floors that held the day's coolness. It smelled of dust, dry herbs from the kitchen rafters, and that mineral smell old walls have after sunset. I liked it immediately because it seemed plain in a useful way. Desk by a window, small library, iron bed. Enough distance from other people that my failures on the page would be private. I am comfortable alone. More than comfortable, really. I chose that rental because nobody would ask how the book was going if there was nobody around to ask. I unpacked over the first afternoon, placed my notebooks on the desk in the upstairs room, lined 3 pens beside them, and made black tea in a chipped blue mug from the open shelf. Before bed, I looked back through the listing photos because I wanted to remember where things had been before I started living in the place. I do that with long rentals. It helps me notice what I myself have altered. That was when I saw the first small mismatch. In the listing, the upholstered chair in the upstairs room faced the window. In the actual room, it faced the door. I assumed staging, nothing more. Listing photographs always involve some amount of arrangement. Cushions fluffed for the camera, chairs turned to catch light, bowls of fruit brought in and removed. I even said that aloud to myself while turning the chair toward the window to match the image. The next morning it faced the door again. That alone would not have meant much, at least not to me. I investigate anomalies by habit. I do not leap to conclusion. I took a photo of the room, compared it to the listing, and noted the difference in a small black notebook I kept for the manuscript. Chair orientation different from photo, likely reset by cleaner before arrival or memory error. The exercise was almost soothing. A discrepancy documented is a discrepancy reduced. The second mismatch was stranger because it involved replacement, not arrangement. In the listing, the kitchen had a striped ceramic fruit bowl on the table. In the actual kitchen, there was a plain cream bowl with a hairline crack on one side. Not missing. Different. I scrolled the old listing photos on my phone while standing in the afternoon light from the window, holding the bowl and turning it in my hands. It was not the same object. You can say hosts refresh household items between photo sessions. And I did say that more than once, but the house began producing these slight substitutions faster than ordinary maintenance could explain. The brass lamp in the downstairs sitting room had a green shade in the listing and a yellow one in reality. The hallway mirror frame showed a carved leaf pattern in the photographs and a smoother edge in person. The books in the little library were not the same editions as the ones displayed online. Same titles in some cases, different spine. That was the first stage. The stage where the wrongness could still pass for business practice, for stale images, for the usual slackness between advertisement and reality. I started documenting everything, not because I felt in danger, not then, but because the accumulation interested me. I made folders on my laptop, listing photo, current photo, notes. By the 4th day, my manuscript had stalled completely, and I was spending mornings walking from room to room with my phone held up like a surveyor's tool. That's when the layout inconsistencies began. Again, I need to describe this carefully because it did not happen as a dramatic overnight transformation. It assembled. In the listing, the upstairs room showed the door to the landing on the left wall and a narrow wardrobe on the right. In my photographs taken from the same angle, the proportions were subtly off. The wardrobe seemed closer to the window than it should have been. I measured. I actually used the cloth tape measure from my suitcase. The distances didn't match the image ratio. I blamed lens distortion. Then I noticed the downstairs sitting room photo from the listing showed a side table that would have blocked the swing of the terrace door if the room were arranged exactly as pictured. In the house itself, the side table stood 2 feet farther away, which solved that problem but created another. The rug pattern under it no longer aligned with the table legs as if it had ever been there. These are maddening details to explain because each one sounds petty on its own. Together they create a feeling I can only call spatial embarrassment, as if the house kept getting caught presenting itself slightly wrong. I contacted the host through the platform on the 5th day and asked, mildly, whether the listing photos were old. He replied that the house was unchanged except for minor wear. When I sent 2 side-by-side images showing a table that could not have occupied both positions, he answered with a smile emoji and said, "Charming old houses always play tricks." In pictures, that annoyed me enough that I became more systematic. I began taking daily photographs from the same marked points on the floor using bits of painter's tape to fix camera position. I sketched room plans, I wrote dates and timed evidence assembly, though I wouldn't have called it that then. I thought I was proving sloppiness, perhaps a host using mixed sets of images from different stages of renovation. Perhaps an agency listing multiple similar houses under one advertisement. Possible, irritating, solvable. Then new objects started appearing. A hatstand by the front door that was in no listing image and, more to the point, had not been there the first week. A porcelain dog on the library shelf. A stack of postcards tied with string in a drawer I had already emptied of stationery and lined with my own notes. None of these things announced themselves. I found them because my attention had sharpened into routine. Morning tea. Photograph the kitchen. Photograph the stair landing. Compare. Note. The house had become my subject, and subjects do not appreciate scrutiny. I should mention something else. The mimic quality of the changes only became clear in retrospect. At the time, it registered as generalized wrongness. Later, looking through the sequence of my own photos, I saw that several additions were not random at all. The hat stand held a canvas shoulder bag increasingly similar to mine, though not the same make. One of the notebooks on the desk, absent at arrival and present later, resembled the black notebook I carried but had a red elastic band instead of blue. A fountain pen appeared in the little ceramic pen cup downstairs. I do not use fountain pen, but it had the same worn grip pattern as my favorite drafting pen, imitated badly in a more expensive material. The house, or someone in it, was not simply altering itself. It was copying from my life with errors. That realization did not come in the moment. What came in the moment was unease so mild it was easy to keep studying. Curiosity is a poor safety mechanism. It makes you stay. On the 9th day, I found a photograph tucked behind one of the books in the library. Glossy paper. Recent. Not the faded family snapshot one expects in old rentals. It showed the downstairs sitting room from the exact angle of one listing photo, except the room in the print contained the yellow-shaded lamp from the real house and the striped fruit bowl from the listing, side by side, as if the image had split the difference between versions. I was not in it. That mattered later. At the time, it simply confirmed somebody was generating fresh images of the rooms using combinations that had never existed in reality. I laid the photograph on the table, went upstairs for my notebook, came back down and found that the porcelain dog had turned to face the stairs. No, I had no proof it had not already been facing that way. But by then I had become the sort of man who knew which direction a porcelain dog faced in a room I was monitoring. I called the host. No answer. I called again. Voicemail in French. I left a message that was calmer than I felt and asked whether anyone had entered the house for maintenance or photo work. An hour later he messaged that no one had entered and that I should enjoy the countryside instead of overanalyzing furnishings. Overanalyzing. I can still hear the condescension in it. The turning point came on the 12th day because I found evidence that crossed from room discrepancies into something undeniably centered on me. I was in the upstairs study, standing by the desk with evening insects tapping softly at the window screen, when I noticed a stack of printed pages under the blotter. They were not my manuscript pages. They were close. Same working title at the top, same chapter heading, but the opening paragraph had been rewritten in a cadence almost like mine and not mine, sentences with one adjective too many, a place name slightly wrong. The draft was imitating my book the way the pen imitated my pen, not copied, studied. I stopped sleeping properly after that. Not from overt fear, from mental agitation. I would lie in the iron bed listening to insects outside and the tiny stone house noises of cooling walls, replaying ordinary explanations that no longer held. If the host was entering, why the performance rather than theft? If the photos were manipulated, who printed them and left them hidden instead of using them? If the objects were meant to unsettle, why so patiently, so specifically? The answer, or the nearest thing I got to one, arrived 2 mornings later. I was comparing the current study arrangement to the original listing image, tape marks on the floor, phone braced on a stack of books for alignment, when I noticed a corner of paper protruding from between the wardrobe and the wall. I had measured that gap earlier. There shouldn't have been room for anything wider than a postcard. I pulled it free. It was a photograph, slightly curled, still smelling faintly of chemical developer under the dust. It showed the upstairs study. Same desk, same chair, same window with the shutters half open to the afternoon, and in the chair, turned a little away from the camera as if interrupted mid-sentence, sat me. Same gray sweater I had on that day, same reading glasses low on my nose, same left hand near the notebook, except there was one impossible thing about it. In the photograph behind me on the wall hung a framed map that had never been in that room, not when I arrived, not later, not in any listing image, not anywhere in the house. The room around me was both the room I stood in and a version of it that had never existed. I dropped the photograph. My hands did something strange then, not shaking exactly, more like losing sequence. I bent to pick it up and missed it the first time. The house was silent around me except for a fly battering itself weakly at the window pane. That was the sound I remember. Small, stupid, alive. I turned in a full circle looking for whatever fixed point would make the image sane. There was none. The chair beside me was slightly different from the one in the photo. The desk angle was wrong by inches. My notebook on the real desk lay closed. In the photo it was open to a page I had not written. I left the house within 20 minutes. Not heroically. Not with a tidy exit. I packed badly, forgot a sweater, nearly left my passport in the bedside drawer, then drove to a hotel in Enmes with every photograph and note in a shopping bag on the passenger seat because I did not want them in the trunk where I could not see them. I kept the documentation. That is the incomplete part of the story. I have the folders still, the comparison images, the measurements, the rewritten manuscript pages, the photograph of me in the impossible room. I also have the book I was meant to write there, unfinished. because I never published a word of what I drafted in that house. Every sentence started feeling copied from a source I couldn't identify. People ask the obvious question when I tell this carefully enough that they believe me. Was it a prank? Was the host entering with keys and moving things around? Were the listing photos from different periods of renovation and I stitched a pattern together because I was alone too long? I have considered all of it,